Thanks a lot, Alex, and it's a pleasure being here again. I have already presented, and some of you were here last year, a first introduction to eFuels, and I would like to give you today an update where we are, what have changed, what are still the challenges, because as you probably know, eFuels are not available at the gas filling stations yet. I'm responsible for content and strategy within the eFuel Alliance, and please allow me to 2 slides for advertising the eFuel Alliance. We are a membership association, so we need members to finance our work. We have now 170 members along the whole value chain. So companies producing eFuels, startups, quite innovative companies like Ineratech, technology providers like Honeywell or Siemens Energy, fuel companies like Idemitsu, Eneos from Japan, for example, Repsol or Neste, and then the users, different sectors. We have here a quite agnostic approach. So we say everywhere where liquid and gaseous fuels are used, we could use eFuels in future. So we're not just focusing on hard to abate, a discussion that we could have later. We have members from the road, from the passenger car and heavy duty sector like Iveco, BMW, Porsche, Mazda, Suzuki, and from the aviation like Lufthansa and some first maritime members as well. Especially in the non-road mobility sector, we have quite a strong growth. Some members are here like Kubota, Liebherr, Deutz and Klaas, and I think it's important for them to support the approach of technology neutrality regulations. We have a team of 8 now and offices in Berlin and Brussels, and our mission is to create a market for eFuels, and for that reasons I first will, my presentation is structured that I first will present the current market status of eFuels, and then we will go into the challenges and the current political developments. So probably it's less technical and a bit more political, but I think the development of eFuels heavily depend on the political development. From a technical point of view, most of this has been invented. So electrolysis is well known, synthesis reactions like Fischer-Tropsch or methanol synthesis are well known. Of course, there are a lot of technical improvements possible, especially if you combine all these different processes. But first, to have investments, we need a clear political framework which are initiating these investments. And for that, the eFuel Alliance is working. For the market research study, we have commissioned Porsche Consulting. They have quite a knowledge and are tracking the development of different eFuel and hydrogen development. And just in the beginning, to give you an overview how important the combustion engine will stay, here it is, this is not from Porsche Consulting, this is from the European Commission. It's from the impact assessment of the EU climate targets 2040, an ongoing discussion. We don't know what the political result will be, what the targets will be for 2040. But regarding the existing fleet, we will still have 37% combustion engines in the passenger car sector in Europe. And I'm expecting even more because we see that electrification is slower than many politicians would like to have. In the truck sector, it's 62, and maybe the truck sector is most comparable to the non-road sector here. Maritime, even more, and aviation, probably no way not to use the combustion engine in future. When it comes to eFuel projects, we have in the database currently around 300 eFuel projects, and these are the more matured projects. So we already have excluded projects which have no updates or which are, from our perspective, not serious enough. In theory, this project could have a production capacity if all of this would be realized of 20 billion liter. Here the Porsche colleagues, Porsche is more interested in gasoline. They are calculating in gasoline equivalent, but we can all recalculate it in diesel or any other fuel or energy unit we would like to use. So it's a strong growth, which is no surprise if you come from nothing. And what's also interesting is that we see different regions of development. We see in Europe a lot of projects, but more smaller or medium size projects, because for the ingredients for e-fuels are a lot of cheap renewable electricity, eligible CO2 source, and we will see later that the Commission, of course, have all of this has been regulated and clearly defined. And there are not many such CO2 sources in Europe available. Biogenic sources are limited, and industrial point sources are only allowed to be used until 2040. For that reason, we have more smaller early projects in Europe. In China, we are currently seeing the strongest development of e-fuels. The largest projects are announced in China, and this is less from a perspective of climate protection. It's more from an industrial perspective to set clear market shares here. We already have more than 40% of electrolyzers manufacturers from China. 5 years ago, Germany was one of the leaders for electrolyzers manufacturers, so this already has turned around. And a second motivation in China is, of course, being more independent from fossil fuels. They don't have that many fossil fuels. They want to be more resilient. For that reason, they are developing especially methanol in China. And we have some developments in the US due to the Inflation Reduction Act, which got not fully erased by Donald Trump. Some projects which can show some capital expenditures until end of 2027 can receive the subsidies of green hydrogen, so some projects will survive. And then in South America, we have a few projects. When it comes to the companies behind these projects, it's a quite fragmented market, and the market consolidation can be expected soon. We already see projects being on hold, projects being stopped, and also so just the best projects will survive. More than half of the projects from the first round of the Hydrogen Bank, which is a funding scheme of the European Commission, have already announced that they will not take the money because it was a strategic bid or the project was not matured enough. Lately, I heard the phrase, "The tourists are leaving the square," and that's good. So just the projects which are serious, which have good conditions, good locations, they are surviving at the moment. I would also say that we are behind the hype curve for innovations. You probably know this Gartner innovation curve, and in the beginning you have a huge hype. We have seen it for electrification, we have seen it for different technologies. And with all the hydrogen strategies popping up in 2020 and beyond, we have seen a lot of announcements in hydrogen and e-fuels, and now we are getting to a more serious phase of the market introduction. What's also interesting is next to HIF, we have 4 Chinese companies. And this is again showing that China is stepping up and is increasing market shares. When it comes to the different kind of e-fuels, we have a clear winner at the moment. When we just see the projects being realized, it's the methanol synthesis. More than 80% of the projects are focusing on methanol. Methanol can be mixed to gasoline, it can be further converted to diesel, it can be even converted to kerosene. We don't have these plants available or existing at the moment, so this has to be built in addition, methanol to gasoline, methanol to diesel, methanol to kerosene. And in case of kerosene, it also has to be certified. So methanol to kerosene is not possible yet because we are missing the international certification for that. But you can see that most of the, no, this is not a pointer, most of the projects are focusing on methanol. But we have some following the Fischer-Tropsch route. There you have a mix of different hydrocarbons, and you need to have a refinery process after the production, and then you can produce e-gasoline, e-kerosene, or e-diesel, and some are following the methanation route. We have excluded the ammonia production here. It might be a fuel for the maritime sector, but I think it's not interesting for the road sector. In terms of numbers, of course, if all of these projects would be realized, we would see a huge market development of revenues of up to 100 billion euro per year and investments needed of more than 550 billion euros. But this is all theoretical because most of these projects have not a final investment decision yet, which we can see on this chart. Just 6% of the projects that we are tracking have a final investment decision at the moment. Most of the projects are still in a concept and feasibility phase. Here you already need a lot of money to do your pre-feed, so your engineering and stuff like that. But we think it's due to the political development, and that's why I would like to talk more about the market challenges. I have skipped one slide. The Porsche, we asked the Porsche consultants what could be the maximum of e-fuels being produced until 2040. You can see here in green what the EU is expecting of e-fuel demand until 2040. That's basically for aviation and maritime, because the Commission has a clear focus. They just want to have e-fuels for the hard-to-abate sectors. But the consultants, they say we can scale up electrolysis production, synthesis production even faster, and by that we can compensate the slower electrification in the road sector. So it is possible to produce more e-fuels, and don't forget, on top of this chart you have the overall liquid fuel demand according to the EU impact assessment of the climate targets 2040. The biofuels are not in here as well. So of course biofuels are existing in addition, but at some point biofuels will be limited due to the existing amount of sustainable feedstocks. What does it mean in cost? This is a price model also by Porsche Consulting. Currently it's unaffordable. We are producing e-fuels right now in pilot plants, in first research projects, and that means, for example, if you have a production of 10 kilotons methanol per year, location like Germany with high electricity prices and conventional technologies, you are above €6 per liter. There are 3 steps how to reduce it. Most important is scale. So if you purchase electrolysis not for 10 kiloton production but for 500 kiloton production, you get a better price. Currently, a lot of electrolyzers are still made per hand, and we need to get to mass production, economy of scale here. Next is location. So there are much better, and we are expecting that most of the e-fuels in future will not be produced in Central Europe. They will be produced where we have an abundance of renewable electricity generation. The reason why Porsche and HIF are going to Patagonia is that we have 7,000 full load hours for windmill there. That's 3 times more than an onshore windmill in Germany, and it's also compensating a lot of the efficiency losses we have by the energy conversions along the value chain. And the last one is then optimization in the technology and also in the heat management. And in the end, we are slightly above €1 per liter. This is also in line with other studies, with papers, even from NGOs, showing it's somewhere in the long future, if we manage to scale up the market, slightly above €1 per liter. That means it stays more expensive than fossil fuels. Current crude oil prices are around 60-70 cents per liter. So we need political support. We need a change how we need a CO2 price on fossil fuels, and we need probably support, for example, a revision of the energy taxation for renewable fuels. So let's start with the political chart. This chart I've already shown you last year, and I just want to mention, deep dive a little bit in the topics where we have seen some developments. There's a huge debate ongoing for the CO2 emission standards. On Thursday in Berlin we have the automotive summit, and there will be probably a German position on the ban of the internal combustion engine, and it's super important that the current regulation will be changed. We are measuring CO2 at the tailpipe. That means there's no future for the combustion engine, because even if you 100% supply combustion engines with the renewable fuels, you will have CO2 at the exhaust pipe. So we need a different logic, a different metric of the regulation. And this is a highly emotional public debate, which is taking a lot of capacities of us. Even more important, I would say, is the Renewable Energy Directive, where quotas for e-fuels for the whole fuel sector are set. And here, in combination with penalties for non-compliance, you can see how the market will develop. Last but not least, also the energy taxation is important. I've already mentioned it. Currently, the regulation is not differentiating between fossil and renewable diesel, for example. You have 45 cents per liter in Germany of taxation. The Commission has proposed not to pay this for advanced biofuels like HVO or eFuel, and that would be a large step to get to affordability. So starting with the Renewable Energy Directive, these are the quotas for the fuel industry to bring hydrogen and e-fuels into the market. Hydrogen and e-fuels are in Europe defined as renewable fuels of non-biological origin, so RFMBOs. We have been started quite optimistic. The eFuel Alliance position always was 5% e-fuels in 2030, and the Commission has copied it in their strategy paper Repower EU after the invasion of Russia in Ukraine. But the Commission proposal for the RED III was just 2.6%, and you can see on top what demand would be created by these quotas. Then in the final trilogues on the negotiations between Commission, Parliament and Council, it was negotiated down to 1%, and multipliers came back, so you have a double counting for RFMBOs, and even on top 1.5 for RFMBOs in aviation and maritime. In the end, if you subtract then the demand for aviation and maritime, you have a really tiny bar. I don't know if you can see it in the back rows, e-fuels left for the road sector. Our focus in the last year was to convince member states to set higher RFMBO quotas, because member states can do more. It's a directive. That means it needs to be implemented in national law within a year. The deadline has been expired in May. Not all countries have sufficiently implemented the RED III. I think it's 10 or 12 countries which have done it at the moment. Here we have analyzed all the proposals which are on the table. So just a few countries have already implemented it in law, like Finland, for example, with a 4% RFMBO quota just for the road sector, which is by far the most ambitious country. Some countries like Germany have just done a public consultation where 1.5% got proposed. You can see that we are already with more than 30 terawatt hours, so more than 3 billion liters of diesel equivalent in 2030. That makes me confident that there will be a market for e-fuels in 2030. Because for the fuel industry, it doesn't make sense to pay penalties. At some point, they have to invest. They are starting to invest in electrolyzers in refineries, because They can use the replacement of gray hydrogen with green hydrogen in refineries, but that won't be enough. They need to invest in methanol, in e-fuels in addition. And of course they will do it first for maritime and aviation, which are often included in these quotas. But if you have to do, like in Finland, 4%, or even like in Spain, 2%, you have to do something for the road, and with that for the non-road machinery as well. And it's super complicated, of course, for investors to meet all of this. There are different targets, different multipliers, different penalties. So it's I understand that investors are struggling to understand the business case and the business model, because it's super complicated and a lot of parameters have to be taken into account. The second challenge is the restrictive production criteria. The European Commission is quite afraid that renewable electricity could be wasted in hydrogen and e-fuels. For that reason, they make it quite complicated to produce e-fuels. You have to take, if you're grid connected, you have to take electricity from new installations which are not older than 36 months. You have to guarantee a temporal correlation of monthly until 2030 and then hourly. So the generation of electricity and the consumption of the electrolyzers have to match. You have to be in the same bidding zone for a geographical correlation. And in addition, I already mentioned CO2 sources, industrial CO2 sources which have a higher concentration of CO2 in the flue gas are only allowed until 2040, which is not enough to amortize your project. And it needs to be an effective carbon pricing system which just exists in Europe, like the EU ETS. So all projects with CO2 from industrial sources outside of Europe are not eligible, and you cannot use it to fulfill your quotas. And of course, all of this makes e-fuels more expensive. There are independent studies from the European Court of Auditors saying that alone, just the temporal correlation are increasing hydrogen costs by 35%. And I don't think that we can afford this in the beginning. On long term, it's reasonable to define sustainability criteria for hydrogen and e-fuels. But if you start like this, you take the breath you need you take the air you need to breathe for a new industry. We see a lot of projects being stopped, and they are arguing because it's too complicated to fulfill these requirements. Our solution and our idea would be to have a market phase in until a certain amount of electrolyzers is installed where you don't have to fulfill this. And we would really like to see the Commission differentiating between unavoidable industrial CO2 emissions and avoidable industrial CO2 emissions, because some CO2 emissions, like for example from a cement plant, from a steel plant, in the chemical industry, you cannot avoid. It's process-related CO2 emissions. If you break up a limestone, you will always have CO2. So if we still build houses with cement, then there will be CO2. And yeah, I also would like to add, these regulations are not coincidences. It's made with a purpose, of course, to make electrification easier than the use of molecules in the end. And you have to change the whole, you have to shift the thinking of people in the Commission if you would like to change it. It's a political marathon. It's not a sprint that you can, I don't know, finance a campaign, a political campaign, and then you will have immediate results here. It's a long way we have to go, because there are political movements behind which have done this for 10, 15 years now. And that's also maybe the reason for the last market challenge, and also the reason why we keep on fighting for the use of e-fuels in the road sector. Because of course we know that electrification will play a huge role in future, and probably electric cars will have higher market shares than combustion engines with e-fuels. But even if we just have 20% of e-fuels used in the road sector, it's more demand than aviation and maritime together. It's for us important to include the road sector. There's also a higher willingness of pay. In Switzerland, for example, there's now a crediting system. Automotive companies can use e-fuels to be compliant with their fleet standards, and that leads to a penalty of to willingness of pay of up to €3 per liter, and you have seen the cost before. Often you have byproducts, for example, with the Fischer-Tropsch route. You always have naphtha, which can be converted to gasoline, or you have gasoline and diesel. And if you cannot sell it to the road sector because nobody wants to buy it, it will be more expensive for hard-to-abate sectors like aviation and maritime. We have an ongoing discussion right now, and it's good to see that most of the automotive manufacturers, they changed their position. So Alex told I worked for the Volkswagen Group before, and I even worked for the VDA, the German Association of Automotive Industry. I left this association in 2021 because it was impossible to lobby for renewable fuels anymore. And there were people like Herbert Diess, Ola Källenius from Mercedes, and they have not allowed any position to support renewable fuels. They just wanted to have electrification. This has changed. The VDA, meanwhile, has a position to include a vehicle class for vehicles which are using only renewable fuels. We have formed a working group to define that, to analyze methodologies. If you would like to have more information, feel free to contact me. The VDA has even a position on favor of a carbon correction factor, so taking into account the existing share of renewable fuels which are already in the market. We already have, for example, B7, 7% biodiesel. So why is a new diesel vehicle treated as 100% fossil fuel vehicle if we already have renewable fuels in the market? This could be an easy fix, an easy solution to include renewable fuels in this logic of car and truck regulation. And in future, with higher shares of renewable fuels, the carbon correction factor will of course get more important. But there are a lot of proposals on the table in the moment, and I'm getting afraid that our most important job is at the moment to prioritize, and because you will never get all of what you demand. In the end, it's always about political compromises. And some players are lobbying for lower targets, more flexibility, more room for plug-in hybrids and range extenders. And it's not easy to bring this bring this in the right order and get all supporters behind it. With that, I'm at the end of my presentation. I hope I could give you an updated overview where we are with eFuels and what are the remaining market challenges.
Thanks for that introduction to eFuels, Tobias. I think I'd like to say that non-road, I argue, is harder to abate than marine and aviation, but trying to convince the politicians of that case is going to be a challenge. You certainly answered one of my critical questions about the red and the problems with the new connections. We've got time for one quick question before I get told off for running late.
How do you judge now the position of the German government, like what Mr. Merz asked at the IAA for technology openness? What's the position of the German government, you think?
We will probably read in the newspaper on Thursday what the position will be. it's difficult to assume, even if all the players are meanwhile claim for technology neutrality. What does it mean? What is technology neutrality? Is it is it a vehicle class for CO2 neutral fuels? Is it a carbon correction factor? Is it a decrease of minus 100% in 2035 to minus 90? That would not change anything. I think the CDU, the conservatives, are aware that renewable fuels have to play a role. For the Social Democrats, which is the second party of the German government, I'm not sure if they understood. It's interesting to see that the unions are shifting a bit. There has been a joint letter from VDA and IG Metall. It's also good that some minister presidents like Olaf Lies from Lower Saxony are supporting the role of renewable fuels, but there are also the other side of the more left-wing social democrats, especially in Brussels, in the European Parliament. They are super stubborn, if I'm allowed to say that, and it's about jobs we are losing. We already have lost more than 100,000 jobs in Europe since last year. In most of them in the field of combustion engine, they won't come back, and as long as we talk and discuss, as more jobs will be lost. Ursula von der Leyen has this strategic dialogue where now working groups are formed to define what technology neutrality will be. There is a new summit in December where results should be presented, and she also said the review process will start in December. And this is what it's all about. In Europe, only the Commission can propose new regulation. So nobody else can change anything. And if the Commission waits, then we cannot do anything. And therefore, we need to increase the pressure. And here, of course, the German position, especially if you have in mind what happens in France at the moment, and the German-Italian position is super important.